You're listening to Don't Waste Water.
We're using recycled water, which is treated sewage. And so in most places, you have a really limited number of things you can do with that. Cooling a data center is one of them. And so wherever we can, we're working with water utilities to build out that infrastructure and make sure that we're using kind of the lowest quality water that we can in our data center so that we leave the higher quality water for other uses.
Hello, bonjour, and welcome to the Don't Waste Water podcast.
We start with how much water are we returning to the community through primarily replenishment. And then that is divided by the total water that we withdraw, subtracting out what we consider the sustainable sources like recycled water and rainwater harvesting. And that is the equation that tells us how far are we towards water positive. And we'll have an updated number for 2024 relatively soon. But for 2023, we were at 41% towards that water positive goal using that equation.
I'm your host, Antoine Walter, and in today's episode, I'm delighted to welcome Will Hughes as my guest.
We've already been using recycled water at about 24 of our data centers globally. We've helped build out those distribution networks in certain cases, and there's a lot in the pipeline for us for our new development that will be relying on recycled water.
Will is Amazon's water sustainability principal.
We didn't find a lot of partners that had projects ready to go. And so we said, great, we'll fund a 6-month study to go gather up a pipeline of viable projects that we could fund, but also others could. And once we got that developed, we went and brought in other corporates to say, let's co-fund these projects together.
Amazon aims to be a good water steward everywhere they operate, and AWS, as the largest cloud services company in the world, is committed to be water positive by 2030.
We're also looking at different type of technologies that may not yet be thinking of their technology as a replenishment technology. We do a lot of outreach in that space as well to say, okay, I think the ag tech world has understood that irrigation efficiency can be a replenishment project. Now the leak reduction world has also started to tap into that, and we're thinking about ways to expand that. But what are the other types of technologies that could also work as a replenishment project? And so we're always doing outreach and thinking about ways to bring in new types of technology and new partners.
And before we start, let me thank our sponsors, Simple Lab and Bluefoot Membranes. This year's World Water Day revolves around glacier preservation, and if you bear with me for that stretch, there's a direct link to today's conversation. Indeed, if data centers consume in the hundreds of billions of liters of water, it's for cooling purposes, and that's my stretch towards the cold ice of the glaciers. Now, with our ever-increased digital and AI uses, comes also a boom in the building and operating of data centers, which in turn gobble more water resources. That being said, we're not doomed to it, and there are ways to decorrelate the increased computing capacity and the water consumptions, as we'll discuss with Will today. While the world's average for water use efficiency in data centers is 1.8 liters per kilowatt-hour, AWS's own numbers are a fraction of that and going down. How? We'll discuss it. Now, even if the specific water consumption goes down as the overall computing needs go up faster, when we look on the horizon, we still foresee that by 2030, global data centers' direct water use could reach roughly twice the levels they are today. And with the continued exponential growth in AI workloads, by 2040, that number may well triple. So there's a section of that water efficiency in data centers can tackle, as I just teased, but there's also an incompressible section that needs to be addressed differently. And that is where pledges like AWS's goal to be water positive by 2030 come into play. What does water positive mean? What's in the scope? Are they on track to achieving it? And how much of a moving target is such a goal? We'll discuss all of that in a minute. To be fair here, AWS is not alone in that pledge, as Microsoft and Meta also aim for water positive by 2030, while Google pledged to replenish 120% of the water it consumes by that same 2030. But what you'll also learn in that conversation with Will is that this represents a tremendous collaboration opportunity for water tech companies, water and wastewater utilities, and local communities. Which is probably the best message we want to share for this year's World Water Day. Water challenges are just a bump in the road if we tackle them together. So without further ado, let me leave Will the floor right after I remind you that if you like what you hear, please share this episode with a colleague, a friend, your boss, or your team. I need to warn you, especially if you're watching this, I recorded this episode while suffering from the flu, so no, I don't look bored or sleepy, I just look sick. Sorry about that, but thanks to Will, trust me, it's nevertheless a great episode. So let me meet you on the other side. Hi, Will. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Antoine. Thanks. Good to be here.
I'm very excited to have that conversation today because we are touching on a topic or a series of topics which are very timely. You at AWS have very probably seen your water consumption in your data centers go through the roof with the surge in AI. So let's start with that. Is it a misconception I have, or did you really see an impact of AI in your water consumptions?
Let's start first with why we use water at all within data center operations. We use water for cooling in data centers primarily because it helps us reduce our energy consumption and helps us meet our other key sustainability goals, like 100% renewable energy and our net zero carbon goal. Water and energy closely connected, and you have to manage both of these things together. And using a responsible amount of water in the right places, we think is by helping us optimize energy and water use together, we're really driving down our impacts on both of those resources. And so the baseline is some amount of water use actually helps in terms of meeting our sustainability commitments. But of course, that doesn't give you a free pass. In fact, I think there's a really wide range of sustainability around water use within data centers. Some of those numbers that we see thrown out there about how thirsty data centers are, I think are like an order of magnitude off of the amount of water that we're using in our data centers. So we want to make sure that as we are using water, we're doing it in a really responsible way. And in fact, with our water positive commitment, we think that we can actually have a net positive impact on water resources going forward. But there's a few key principles that we keep in mind that I can run through quickly as we think about how we're going to do that and how we're going to meet that goal. So first off, think really carefully about where you use water for cooling. You don't have to use water, but you'll use more energy. And so we're always thinking about that trade-off. In certain places like Cape Town, South Africa, which was approaching day zero in 2018, in India, we do not use water for cooling. Even if you're efficient in those places, there's such extreme scarcity that it's not the right use of water resources. Then we think about efficiency. We've been at the forefront on water efficiency, a number of things that we do, and we're using about 0.18 liters of water per kilowatt hour of energy. And that's gone down year over year the past few years. We also think about where can we use more sustainable sources, not potable water resources from water utility. Wherever possible, we're using recycled water, which is treated sewage. And so in most places, you have a really limited number of things you can do with that. Cooling a data center is one of them. And so wherever we can, we're working with water utilities to build out that infrastructure and make sure that we're using kind of the lowest quality water that we can in our data center so that we leave the higher quality water for other uses. And then finally, we think about obviously replenishing after we minimize our water use through those first couple approaches, how do we put back water? How do we help support water resources in the way that community needs the most? For sure, the data center infrastructure around the world is growing because so much of our economy is built on that. But if we keep those principles in mind, we think we can actually have a net positive impact on water resources as the industry continues to grow.
There's a lot to deconstruct in what you just said. So let me take them one by one. You mentioned the 0.18 liter per kilowatt hour. If my research is right, that makes you about 10 times better than the average in that sector. Other big players have also better numbers than the average, but not as better as you. So what's the trick?
There's a number of things that go into that. Number one, it starts with the design of your cooling system. We use in the vast majority of our data centers a direct evaporative cooling design, where most of the year, you're actually just using the outside air to cool your data center. You only turn on that direct evaporative system on the warmest days. And in some parts of the world, in Northern Europe, that can be less than 5% of the time that you're actually using water. And when you are, it's still a very efficient user of water, that direct evaporative design. So we've built out the vast majority of our data infrastructure using that cooling technology, which is very water efficient. But then within that, we still look at, okay, well, how do we keep making it more efficient? We track water use in real time. Anywhere that we see, we map out how much water should we be using versus how much water are we using in real time. If those differ in a big way, if we're using more than we think we should, then we go and cut a ticket, go to the operations teams and say, what's going on? How do we make sure that we get back to where we should be? And then we've also been thinking about how do we adjust? Like I said, we only flip on that cooling system when we really need it. How do we keep raising the temperature at which we switch it on? How can we rely on the outside air more? And we've been testing that, making sure that we can do it while still providing really reliable service to customers. And we've seen some water savings there as well. So it's kind of a constant, the baseline technology, very efficient, but then we've been iterating, testing out new ways of reducing water use and using some of the IoT and services that we provide to customers within our own facilities to make sure that we're optimizing there.
One other element you mentioned is that you're trying to use reused wastewater. How does that interface with the local utility? Would they deliver to you in a service fashion and you pay per cubic meter, or would you support them in implementing water reuse technologies so that you can in turn have that water available?
Yes, both. I mean, so in some places there are already existing purple pipe systems. Purple pipe is, it's a different color pipe to make sure that you're not accidentally connecting with the potable water system. In places where the treatment is in place to get to a sufficient quality to make it safe to use, and there's some distribution network. We've already been using recycled water at about 24 of our data centers globally. We've helped build out those distribution networks in certain cases, and there's a lot in the pipeline for us for our new development that will be relying on recycled water. So stay tuned for more there. And we're thinking about where it doesn't exist. The first question we ask the utility now when we go in there is there recycled water? And if not, can we work with you to help create that system? And in some places like in Ohio, we've been having conversations with other companies and the water utility trying to bring together a group to say, how can we collectively create enough demand, communicate that to the utility in a way that it makes sense for us to all co-invest in that together. We can't do it alone. Our facilities and the individual data center does not use enough water, and we only use it part of the year to justify an investment that you may need to make. So we're saying, how do we bring together a whole bunch of players to make sure that we can have a larger utility water system wide impact and switch a larger number of us over to recycled water? Those conversations take time for sure. Infrastructure development takes a long time, but we're having a lot of those conversations, and it's always the first choice for us now, wherever we can get enough interest to create those solutions.
I guess that leads us pretty straightforward into your replenishment goals and your water impact. But before I go to that part, I just have a curiosity question, because I bumped into Upman Ulal last year at the New York Climate Week, and we discussed the water impact of data centers. And it was like, I don't get it. We should just use ground source heat pumps, a closed loop, and then we don't use water anymore. And I guess that must have other drawbacks. But I'm just, as a Muggle, wondering if that's the kind of stuff you're looking into.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly folks in the company thinking about what are the new technologies that we can integrate. But, part of operating a data center is ensuring reliability for customers. And so there's a really high bar to make sure that if you're introducing new technology, you're not going to impact that quality of service and the reliability. So I think part of what I think about sustainability is not what's the best possible technology you could ever think of, but what can you reliably implement today? A combination of a very water and energy efficient cooling design, using IoT, experimenting with changing the operational set points so that you're maximizing your water efficiency. There is so much construction happening right now around data centers to support the growth in demand. So we need to make sure what we're doing right now is as sustainable as possible, because that infrastructure is going to be there for a long time. While you're also thinking about, well, how can we keep making that better in the future? And so it's a balance. There are definitely people thinking about new innovations, but we're thinking about how do we keep making the very sustainable systems we already have better to make sure that we're not building something now that isn't going to provide the type of efficiency that we need long term.
You mentioned AWS is pledged to be water positive by 2030. How do you define water positive?
Water positive means that we are returning more water to communities and the watershed than we're withdrawing from them. The equation is basically, we start with how much water are we returning to the community through primarily replenishment. And then that is divided by the total water that we withdraw, subtracting out what we consider the sustainable sources like recycled water and rainwater harvesting. And that is the equation that tells us how far are we towards water positive. And we'll have an updated number for 2024 relatively soon. But for 2023, we were at 41% towards that water positive goal using that equation.
Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to quickly thank my sponsor, Simple Lab. If you're in the water industry and you're running a water quality sampling campaign or tweaking plant process performance, Simple Lab has you covered. You can easily order online from over 275 commercial labs. Simply put, Simple Lab is a one-stop shop for everything from routine testing kits to specialized analyses like PFAS or microplastics. You don't have to juggle multiple labs and complicated logistics anymore. Instead, you get a single, streamlined process for ordering kits and reviewing results. Plus, there's always a real person to talk to, so if you're tired of cobbling together lab documents and quotes and services for each new requirement, or you just want to try a new way for more efficient testing of water samples, check out Simple Lab. They're all about making water quality testing, well, simple. So head to their website, the link is in the description, line up the tests you need, hit order, and let them handle the rest. Thanks Simple Lab for supporting my work. Check them out to support me, and back to me. So 2023, you had 3.5 billion liters returned, so that's 41%. And in your 2023 report, you also indicated that you have another 3.5 billion liters in the pipe, so which will get you to 7 billion. So if I do quick, stupid math, that means with what you have in the pipe today, you are towards 82% of your goal of water positivity.
There's a lot of moving parts in those equations.
I was going to say,
Not so many, but the water use is certainly growing. We're also adding more water volume from sustainable sources as we're also growing the volume delivered through replenishment. So we're now at about 24 replenishment projects that will deliver 7.6 billion liters of water when they're complete. And then there's a whole lot more replenishment under development, and that we'll be announcing in this year, and kind of a continuous drumbeat of new projects that are under development that are coming out. So we'll have an updated number on that progress. But, there's also a lag to the replenishment projects. When you go and build something and then it takes a while to do that, and then sometimes those volumetric benefits take a while to kick in as well that are being delivered from, say, a new wetland project or a groundwater recharge project. And so that pipeline is big and growing rapidly, but it also takes some time to phase in terms of what you see in that year being delivered. And different projects have different timelines for implementation and for realizing those benefits. So stay tuned for progress. There will be a lot more to come, but we're well on our way to the goal, and we expect that we'll meet the 2030 goal for sure.
What counts within the scope of your water impact? To be clear here, if I take the US, for instance, the number one water user in the US is energy production. So would the fact that you're using energy mean that you're counting some elements of that energy production as a portion of your water impact, or is it not part of your scope?
Our water positive program, as well as every other one I've seen, has focused on the direct water use footprint, the footprint in our operations. And that's where we're primarily focused within the water positive program. Part of what you might call scope 2 water use, the water associated with electricity production, is obviously very different levels of water intensity for different types of production. And we are at 100% renewable energy with our electricity use across the company, and wind and solar in particular are very low water use technologies. So as we've reached that, the water intensity of the energy use has also gone down dramatically. So I think we're working on both of them, but in kind of different ways under different sustainability goals.
I have a stupid question. I love the fact that you have a pledge to be water positive, but you're a business. So why do you do that to yourself? You could just be using as much water as you want, and as long as you pay for it.
Water is such a fundamental resource. I don't think you would ever, as a company, say, yeah, we're good, don't worry about that, either from an operational or from a reputational standpoint. Like, you wouldn't want to go into a place like Cape Town and say, give us all the water we need to cool a data center, because just even from a purely selfish standpoint, if you're at a point where you're turning off a tap for water, obviously that's going to impact your operations too. These are big investments that we're making. And so there is, even just from a purely selfish perspective, you could say, look, this wouldn't be the right decision in many places to use water, or we want to make sure we're using it in a responsible way and in fact investing in projects that support long-term sustainability. But then, of course, there's also just the be a good steward of these resources in the communities where you're operating. And water is one of those things where if you don't have water for a day or a few hours, you realize the importance of the resource, and it's just not something that you can ignore. And so it was a clear call to us that both from an operation reputational standpoint, that you have to make sure that you're using water in a responsible fashion, and then going the extra step to replenish and return water. It's the right thing to do. And there, in the internal discussions, no one ever questioned that. Water is such a fundamental resource. I think it's pretty self-explanatory why we're focused on that as one of our key investments in sustainability.
I obviously appreciate, that's music to my ears, but it's good to hear it from you. So yeah, thanks for that. On the replenishment part of the story, there are very different ways that you can use to replenish water in the watershed. I'm going to give an example from one of your competitors because I discussed that with them on that microphone. But when Microsoft is teaming up with Fido, the aim is to reduce leaks. And if you reduce leaks, then you have less non-revenue water, which means more water goes to its end use. And that's saved water in the water cycle. That's one way to do it. My question here is, you have all these possible tracks. How do you pick the ones which make the most sense in your context, in your watershed, in your communities? And when you pick that track, how do you implement it? Is it Amazon opening its wallet and paying for it? Or are you then really involved in the project and you help them make it happen?
Even before we get to replenishment, there's a conversation about, well, how do we think about investing in water efficiency or recycled water within our facilities versus replenishment? So we're already thinking about kind of setting that internal price of water to first think about how do we reduce our impact and then go to replenishment. Now, you could, for example, say, we're going to do zero liquid discharge in every facility, but what's the cost of that and the benefit of it versus going and investing in a watershed or helping a water utility reduce leakage? So we're already thinking and kind of have a framework set up for how to compare across those. And then I'd say for the replenishment investment.
Sorry to cut you, just because that is super interesting. That means you are dealing as your internal utility somewhat. You're giving a real price to water so that you can do like an economic equation and to see what makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, we say first, we're willing to spend a bit more to minimize our water use within our facilities before we go do replenishment. The theory being, we want to make sure we're not just using replenishment as a way to give ourselves a pass. We're going to insist on being as efficient as possible. We're going to insist on using sustainable sources as possible. But then at a certain point, you do realize that you can go do more good by investing outside of your facility. So yes, we have internal costs and approaches to making those decisions. And then within replenishment, I'd say we are guided by largely what that community needs as defined by public policymakers, local authorities, local NGOs, groups that know that watershed. We always work with them to figure out what the key need is so that we make sure we're addressing the most urgent water-related challenge in that basin. So in some cases, that has been about water access. In other places, it's been about scarcity. We did the initial project with Fido back in 2022 in Spain, in a small town there, helping them identify and reduce leaks. We're continuing to always think about and having a lot of conversations with water utilities about how we can help them reduce leakage through different types of technologies, as well as protect source water. And I think that utility conversation is a really interesting one because where we can help support water sustainability directly in the system supplying us, it's the most immediate impact and benefit that you can create. And so lots of interesting conversations happening there. But in terms of our involvement, I'd say it varies. In certain places, again, like in Ohio, when we went in and started looking for replenishment around the Columbus area, we didn't find a lot of partners that had projects ready to go. And so we said, great, we'll fund a 6-month study to go gather up a pipeline of viable projects that we could fund, but also others. And once we got that developed, we went and brought in other corporates to say, let's co-fund these projects together. And so last year I announced a significant wetland project that is being co-funded by a number of different corporates. And so we're often involved in helping create that pipeline of projects. We're not usually the ones that are out there with the shovels and the backhoes, although we have had some employees helping to plant some wetlands, in particular on the Thames River Basin. But we're often involved in conceptual developing the pipeline of projects. And we're always thinking about not just how do we meet our goal, but can we go bigger and do something at a larger scale, bring others in to create the most impact.
Let me pause here for a second to ask you a question. Have you ever heard of a membrane that refuses to break? It sounds unusual, but it's true. Meet Bluefoot Membranes, a Belgian company that has developed the first and only unbreakable membrane specifically designed for MBR, if you're new here, membrane bioreactor applications. This technology is setting a new standard in wastewater treatment. Water engineers and industry experts have tested this membrane, and no matter how much they pull and twist, the membrane holds strong. Now, it's not just about membranes, it's also about an award-winning and passionate team that doesn't take impossible as an answer. The people at Bluefoot Membranes are driven by a mission to make wastewater reuse the new standard, united by a shared purpose to leave a blue footprint on the world. So yes, they manufacture cool membranes, but they also push the boundaries of what's possible in MBR technologies. To learn more about them, check the link to their website in the description. A big thanks to Bluefoot Membranes for sponsoring this episode, and back to me. I'm sorry, I have a curveball question for you. I heard, let's say, that AWS is super innovative when it comes to designing its data centers, is very much on the edge of technology when it comes to the core of the technology, but can be a bit more conservative when it comes to water replenishment, water tech, because you want to have something which is sturdy and proven, and you can't really afford to take the risk to go to experimental tech. Would that reflect your experience, or is it like nonsense?
In terms of adopting technology within our replenishment program, is there some more conservatism there?
That's somewhat the question, because I would fully understand it. I mean, if you're working with water utilities, there's a full word to explain why those are the most conservative people in the sector for very good reasons. So you can't really come with something which is cutting edge when it comes to replenishment or infrastructure improvement or stuff like that. Nevertheless, you mentioned that you've worked with FIDO, so that already gives us kind of the answer. But how do you put the bar on that risk-taking?
I think it's a balance. We did, that first project of its type at the time back in 2022 around using technology to identify leaks. So certainly integrated some innovation there. We've also been partnering with companies on helping farmers, providing them with technology to help them optimize irrigation. And then we've also been, I think, at the forefront with our partners at WaterPlan in terms of integrating technology into automating and raising the bar on monitoring of projects. So there's a bunch of technology and innovation in the program. There's also a lot in the pipeline that you'll see soon that is adopting innovative technology as well. But certainly you have to be really careful. Water utilities are inherently conservative, and rightfully so in a certain way, because they have a public trust to deliver clean, safe water to people. And so we're always thinking about not just how can we meet the goal, but how can we adopt the most innovative technologies, business models, financing models into our program? Because we don't just want to meet the goal and say, great, we did it. We want to meet the goal with and highlight, elevate those innovations that are going to help solve challenges across the water sector. And if we can integrate more of that into the program, we think that kind of accelerates the pace of change within the water sector. So one other example, which is pretty different, but water.org, we started working with them in 2019 when they weren't doing a lot of work funded by corporations at that point, but we recognized a really innovative approach that was a lot more cost effective. You could reach a lot more people. And we started working with them and have done a bunch of different things with them over the years to help them accelerate their work, bring it into the cloud, build the new water and climate fund that has a goal to reach 100 million people and raise $1 billion. So I think we've recognized some of those innovations and have integrated them into the program already, and we plan to do more.
Shameless plug. That's something we discussed with Gary White on that microphone. So if people want to have that deeper explanation as to what you're doing with water.org, he explain how that works. One thing which got me thinking is in water tech endeavors, one of the ongoing trends is digitization. Lots of what we're doing in the sector is undergoing that transformation. And I would expect that a lot of what those companies are doing is probably hosted on an AWS infrastructure. Does that contribute to what you're looking into, where you're saying, okay, we can be partners on the two ends? Like, we help you out with the infrastructure and with the way to use data centers the best way. On the other hand, help us with our replenishment efforts.
There are different programs within the company, and we're thinking about how do we bring those together to align to do more to accelerate innovation within the water sector. So certainly we have a program that can help support pilot projects through the Water Positive program and can help companies like that deploy their technology, but we're also talking to, for example, the Climate Pledge Fund within Amazon, and about how we can not just invest in projects, but invest in companies that we see as being really key to the success of us meeting our water positive goal, as well as supporting the water sector more broadly. So, for example, the Climate Pledge Fund made an investment in Subeca, which has really scalable, low cost, automated metering technology. And we're both thinking about how to integrate that into our own facilities, as well as supporting them to help serve the market more broadly. And so industrial as well as municipal customers. So that's one example where we're working with them. And then there are other ways that AWS supports water technology companies. The Clean Energy Accelerator that we had has a water track. They've helped support some water technology companies and are thinking more broadly about how can they help the most innovative companies out there figure out how to raise capital more effectively, do their pitch more effectively, innovate more effectively, as well as connect with the companies and potential customers that can help them scale faster. So a few different parts of Amazon, and we're trying to figure out how we can most effectively point all of those things in the same direction.
We touched on your pledge. We touched on some of the stories which take you towards your pledge. Now, if we go in the depth of it, if we pick one poster child project which you've done, can you name one or two, and can we go through all the steps so that we understand where it starts, how it develops, and how you measure your results?
There's some new projects that we've developed with a company called Kilimo, which has an agricultural technology that helps farmers optimize their irrigation. We've actually done a couple projects with them. The first one was in Chile, and they're helping farmers convert from flood to drip irrigation. We realized there were some more gains to be made by helping actually convert the irrigation type from flood to drip. And that was our first project with them. And then we came to them and said, hey, we really would love to do a similar thing around our operations in Brazil. And so together we thought about how to bring them into that new market and how to identify similar projects there, but in new geography for them. And so spent some time working on that together. We're partway through implementation. I was actually down there a few weeks ago and visiting one of the coffee farms where we were actually going around and testing the soil to make sure that the soil moisture data they were getting from the system was matching the reality on the ground. So went all around this coffee plantation, taking soil samples, comparing it to the data. It was largely spot on. And it's that type of data that's allowing them to only irrigate when they really need to and forego the withdrawals from the groundwater that they use otherwise to make sure that as much water is left in that aquifer as possible.
In the case of a Kilimo, how do you meet with Jairo? Is he reaching out to you? Do you reach out to him? How does that work?
You know, it's kind of a small universe, the water world and the replenishment portion in particular. So I don't recall exactly where we met. It was probably at an event where we crossed paths and started conversation a couple of years ago. And then we just keep kind of looking at the map and where we're focused, where they're operating, and also thinking about how do we scale this up? How do we bring more partners in? It's an ongoing conversation, and we tend to move in similar circles. Although I will say we're also looking at different type of technologies that may not yet be thinking of their technology as a replenishment technology. We do a lot of outreach in that space as well to say, okay, I think the ag tech world has understood that irrigation efficiency can be a replenishment project. Now the leak reduction world has also started to tap into that, and we're thinking about ways to expand that. But what are the other types of technologies that could also work as a replenishment project? And so we're always doing outreach and thinking about ways to bring in new types of technology and new partners.
So that means right now you're actively looking for more partners and projects. And if you are, what would be the geographies you're looking for? What would be the types of company you're looking for? Because they might be listening to this. So let's help them find you.
Yeah, I think the primary thing, geography matters a lot, right? So water is local and we're looking to replenish water where we're actually operating. And so any of our AWS regions, and you can go online and see where we have regions, those are places where we are largely going to be sourcing replenishment. And then priority areas for us right now are in the US and the Southwest US, certainly looking for new projects, and in Latin America. So it's a wide range. We're making investments in a lot of places, but I'd say those AWS regions are a good place to start looking at where we are. And, you know, you can always find me on LinkedIn if you have an innovative idea.
So as always, the links to all of that will be in the description. So check it out. I have a question on your achievements, because you're making reports every year where you give big numbers, stuff like that. I know that there are projects which go into tokenization of water replenishment. We discussed on that microphone with botanical water, for instance. I had also water ledger. Is it something you're looking into to make it even more transparent in terms of what you're achieving? And also the other side of the same coin, something which can be maybe easier to valorize, because now if it's a token, then your water replenishment somewhat becomes an NFT. It's the kind of word you want to avoid, but it could open new avenues, let's say.
Yeah, I think transparency is key. We're always looking at what's the right way to most effectively communicate our progress. So right now we've got some summary statistics, progress towards water positive, our water use efficiency, the facilities using recycled water. And then we also have details of our replenishment projects on our webpage right now. If you find the Amazon Water Stewardship webpage, we have at least a thumbnail on each project with links to the larger announcements that we've made, which have more detail. And so we've done a fair amount already. I think we also, in addition to thinking about other types of data, want to do a better job of telling the stories about what those projects look like. Not just announce them when they're started, but go back and say, well, what was the impact from that? What does that look like tangibly for the community? So thinking certainly about how we do more of that storytelling and allow the communities that are impacted to tell that story.
So let's now look into the future. Forward-looking statement. I know that listed companies always love that. 2030, you have this goal to be water positive. What happens after that?
We keep going. We certainly keep pace with the growth as data centers will continue to build those out. There'll be new regions, new countries that we're entering, and we'll continue to grow the program to match the growth on the data center side, certainly. But also, it's not a one and done, set it and forget it kind of thing with replenishment, right? We want to make sure that we're continuing to monitor, continuing to maintain those projects. And certain projects may last longer, but often there's kind of a 10-year shelf life to say, great, we supported that project. Not to say the project will stop operating or benefiting the community, but for most of those projects, we say we're going to claim the benefits towards our water positive goal for a period of 10 years, unless there's a reason to do shorter or longer, which means we're going to come back and say, great, that project was a success. How do we make a new investment to continue the benefit to that community? And so there will be kind of an ongoing backfill of projects as we reach either the useful life or just say it's time to invest in a new project there. So the work will, in theory, never be done here. We're going to keep working on ensuring we're meeting the goal and replenishing more, also integrating, the key innovations that are going to drive progress across the water sector into that program.
So if I go full circle to my first question, which was the increased water impact with the surge of AI and data centers overall, what I get after those 37 minutes of conversation is it's not a big deal as long as we manage it, as long as we ensure that we are optimizing water within the data center and we are replenishing or compensating those impacts within the watershed. Is that a good way to understand your explanation?
I'd say that it's incumbent on us to make sure that we're doing it in a responsible and sustainable manner. And I think there's a wide range out there right now. And what you see reported is probably kind of at the high end of not the most water sustainable version of what's being done, some of the numbers that you see in terms of the water intensity. So not saying communities shouldn't be concerned about that, but I think they should be saying, show me how you're going to be a responsible use of water resources. And if you're being careful about where you use water, if you're maximizing water efficiency, if you're helping communities invest in recycled water infrastructure and all the resilience that brings to them, if you're working with a community to make meaningful investments in water resources, I think we can minimize the negative impacts and even have a positive impact on water resources if you're doing all of that.
I have a curiosity question to round it off. Is it a field where you're meeting with other cloud suppliers, other big names in the sector to exchange best practices? Because after all, it's not a zero-sum game. You can all be learning from what you're doing. Or is it really so strategic as water's on the bottleneck of operations that if you have a decisive edge, you'd rather keep it for yourself?
Certainly not. I don't think we see water sustainability as a competitive piece of this. We talk with the water stewardship teams at other companies. We co-invested in this Ohio wetland project with Google. So we're working together on replenishment and certainly don't see that as competitive. We're similarly working with them to build out recycled water infrastructure and find ways where we can collectively help invest in that. And then we also have the Amazon Sustainability Exchange, which has a lot of detail on how we run our program, how we designed it, some of the ways that we're advancing water sustainability with our own operations so that others can learn from it. So no, I think the vast majority of it we see as non-competitive and things where we want to share the best practices with each other.
Well, Will, it's been a pleasure to explore that topic with you in that deep dive. To round it off, I have a set of rapid fire questions.
It's time for the rapid fire questions.
What's your definition of innovation in action?
I think it's a technology business model that can be readily implemented, something that can be scaled quickly.
What's the most innovative water solution you've seen in the past 12 months?
It's not technology, but I really love what Moonshot Missions, George Hawkins, is doing there to help water utilities. They're a nonprofit model, so they're not trying to create a long-term client relationship necessarily. They are thinking about how can we help utilities solve their problems, integrate technology, and they have a team of people that's really experienced at doing that. Because I think a lot of the challenge is not about developing new technology, it's about how do we integrate it safely, faster, and they're doing a great job with that.
In one word, what's the biggest challenge facing the water industry today?
Inertia. Making exactly what I was just talking about. Making innovation happen at a faster pace, building what we need to, getting rid of the red tape to build out the water systems we need to provide sustainable solutions long term.
Who is a water innovator you admire and why?
Really, it's coming back to Gary White. I think he's one of the key innovators. It's not brand new at this point, but that type of realization that just unlocked the financing, not to say we need to go directly raise funding for every person, but we can actually unlock other sources of capital to accelerate impact in terms of reaching more people with water and sanitation solutions. I think that was a brilliant innovation and one that we're really proud to have supported.
What's a single piece of advice you would give to water entrepreneurs?
Don't try to build the Cadillac version right away, right? Build something that is scalable. That's why I think Subeka and some of these technologies helping identify leakage, for example, are wonderful because they don't take a year and millions of dollars to implement the solution. It's really helping to make that digital transition happen with low-cost hardware and with easily set up software in a way that I think those types of easy to implement solutions are the key here.
What's one water taboo you think we should break?
I think it's got to be around water reuse and moving towards direct reuse. You know, before we do desalination, increasing the amount of water recycling that we're doing, and whether it's direct or indirect, you know, it's a huge opportunity to capture a valuable resource, a drought-proof resource. People still make wastewater even in a drought, and getting over some of that X factor, better education on the safety of water reuse, I think is key, especially for some of in the US and Europe, some of the places that are water stressed that haven't really invested in that heavily so far. I think that's key.
To which extent I think you're helping, because if you are making a very useful use case for indirect wastewater reuse, then we are breaking the taboo, and that's stuff people are more prone to adopting than direct potable reuse. So I guess it's a realistic good news, I guess.
Yes.
If people want to follow up with you, you mentioned LinkedIn. Is that the right place, or what would be another place to reach out to you?
That's probably the best place. And then if they want to learn more about the program, then searching for Amazon Water Stewardship, there's a lot of details about what we're doing and the projects there. So between those, check out what we're doing and feel free to reach out if you think your work intersects with ours.
Awesome. Well, I guess we should have a follow-on conversation the day you reach the water positive threshold.
Yeah.
It's a moving target, and then you will need to keep pushing. But that would be like, I think, great news to share. So happy to share those news. And yeah, talk to you soon.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Don't Waste Water. This podcast was brought to you by GF Piping Systems. Loved this episode? Head over to Apple Podcasts to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. See you next time.